All right, hello everybody, and welcome to Mumford and Other Observations, episode 4. Episode 4.
Yeah.
Today we are talking about track number 4, Roll Away Your Stone.
It's going to be lots of fun.
Yes.
I'll roll away my stone. You can roll away yours.
Yep.
It'll be great. Yeah, can't believe we're already on episode 4.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like we just started, and here we are doing the 4th one already. It's good to have Bridget back. We missed you last week.
Yes,
during
I know.
the Winter Winds episode.
Yes, well, that's okay. You had a wonderful person instead of me. So
yes, it was fun to have Andrew on for sure. So, but it's good to have the old gang back together again and to dive into this song. So, as always, why don't we start off with you reading off the lyrics?
All right, here we go.
Now, last week Andrew did a really dramatic reading
of course he
of
did.
the Winter Winds lyrics. So, expectations are high now.
Okay.
Just do it however you want.
Channel my inner Andrew.
We don't let Andrew decide how we live our lives. Just do it however you want. No, we'll be pleased with it. I'm sure it'll be great.
I hope so. Roll away your stone. Roll away your stone. I'll roll away mine. Together we can see what we will find. Don't leave me alone at this time, for I'm afraid of what I will discover inside. 'Cause you told me that I would find a hole within the fragile substance of my soul, and I have filled this void with things unreal, and all the while my character it steals. Darkness is a harsh term, don't you think? And yet it dominates the things I see. It seems that all my bridges have been burnt, but you say that's exactly how this grace thing works. It's not the long walk home that will change this heart, but the welcome I receive with the restart. Darkness is a harsh term, don't you think? And yet it dominates the things I see. Stars, hide your fires. These here are my desires, and I will give them up to you this time around, and so I'll be found, with my stake stuck in this ground, marking the territory of this newly impassioned soul. But you've gone too far this time. You have neither reason nor rhyme with which to take this soul that is so rightfully mine.
Mm-hmm. Well done.
Thanks.
Not as dramatic as Andrew, but it was well done nonetheless.
Thank you.
We'll take it. So that's "Roll Away Your Stone" by Mumford and Sons, and now we'll do the plain verse or prose translation, as Andrew called it, the No Fear Mumford translation of the lyrics. So the one that I wrote that doesn't sound nearly so pretty as Mumford and Sons, but is a little more clear.
Mm-hmm.
Open up to me, and I'll open up to you. We'll go on this journey of discovery together. Please don't make me journey alone, because I don't think I'm going to like what I find on my journey of self-discovery. I'm afraid because you've told me that my soul is fragile and has a hole in it, a hole that takes away my very personhood while I try to fill it with meaningless things. Almost everything I see is shrouded in darkness, as dramatic as that might sound. It's too late to go back the way I came, but you say that's how it has to be for grace to work. The journey itself isn't going to change me. What will change me is the grace I receive every time I begin again after failing. Almost everything I see is shrouded in darkness, as dramatic as that might sound. So what if there is darkness everywhere? I know what I want, and I will surrender those wants to you, planting my soul firmly in your presence. My soul is no longer apathetic, but on fire. And as for you, darkness, that hole inside of my soul, you have no right to take my own self away from me. So that's that. And now it's time to introduce our special guests for the evening, which would be Dante Alighieri and his Divine Comedy, and a returning guest, William Shakespeare, and his tragedy Macbeth.
Mm-hmm.
So, written in medieval Italy by Dante Alighieri, The Divine Comedy is an epic poem about the author's fictional journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven. Guided by the ghost of the Roman poet Virgil, Dante must descend to the lowest pits of hell before he can climb the mountain of purgatory and enter the celestial paradise of heaven. So that's a very bare bones description of the Divine Comedy. It's incredibly detailed. It's really poetic. It's just it's something else. So this doesn't do it justice by any means, but it gives you an idea of what it's basically about.
One of Shakespeare's tragedies, Macbeth, is unique among the plays in that the main character of the story is despicable. Other tragedies, such as Hamlet and King Lear, have likable protagonists. Macbeth's protagonist is actually the villain of the story. At the beginning of the play, he receives a prophecy that he will become the King of Scotland. In order to fulfill the prophecy, he takes fate into his own hands and murders the current king, his lust for power sending him spiraling down the path of madness.
So it's a cheerful story.
Yes.
It's got one of the least likable protagonists in all of Shakespeare, arguably. He's a bad guy. So it's unique. Shakespeare doesn't usually have the leading character be the villain. So that's kind of ancillary to the discussion of Mumford and Sons, but I thought it was an interesting observation there. And it's called Mumford and Other Observations, so I think I'm allowed to make other observations once in a while.
I'd say so.
Yeah. So those are going to be our two main sources for this song that we'll discuss. And so without further ado, I guess let's jump into the line-by-line analysis of Roll Away Your Stone by Mumford and Sons. So the first line is, roll away your stone, I'll roll away mine. So there is a lot in this particular line here. Brings to mind just a wealth of different things to me. So first of all, the first thing I thought of when examining this line was the resurrection of Christ, right? When the stone was rolled away from the tomb and it was revealed that Christ was no longer dead and buried, but he was risen. And so that illusion brings with it just a wealth of other imagery and events, most notably the tragedy of Good Friday, and then Christ's descent into hell after that, leading into the resurrection. So, and that ties in very much with all the themes in this song of darkness, and that that hole or that void inside the speaker's soul, the allusion to the death of Christ on Good Friday and hell and everything is very much tied in with that, which of course brings us to Dante's Divine Comedy, which is all about the descent into hell and then the journey up Mount Purgatory into the celestial paradise. Dante splits the time in the Divine Comedy between hell, purgatory, and heaven, but hell is the most well-known of the three volumes. And I think it's typically what people think of when they think of Dante, is they think of the Inferno, as it's called. It's got some really memorable moments in it, when they're standing at the entrance of hell before they go inside of it. There's a sign over it that says, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." It's just, that's very iconic.
Yeah.
Dante is never specifically referenced in this song. So it might be something of a stretch that I'm using him as a source here, but the more I examined the structure of the song and the themes that were in it, the more I realized that it ties in very closely with a lot of themes, and as well as the structure of the Divine Comedy. So, not sure if Mumford was thinking of this as a specific source when he was writing the song, but I think it really adds a lot of perspective when we look at it in the light of the Divine Comedy, and especially because of the Divine Comedy's relationship to the resurrection and Good Friday. the Divine Comedy itself takes place during Easter weekend. And so it's very much tied in with, Christ's suffering and death, and then his journey from the netherworld up into the heavens. So that's all very much connected with each other. And I actually, back in 2019, I published an article about this song and how its structure mirrors the structure of Dante. So if I'll put a link to that in the show notes and the video description for this podcast. So if you want to go take a look at that, you can. We won't talk very much about the structure of the song in this episode today, but that article has more information about that and its links to Dante. The last preliminary thing I want to get into there before going on with this line is that something I noticed that I thought was really interesting. So in the Cave, which was 2 songs ago, they talked about the harvest, right? Which is a very autumnal theme. So the Cave would be fall, which is followed immediately by winter winds, which is followed immediately by this song, which has a resurrection and an Easter theme to it, which would be the springtime. So I think if we look at these 3 songs as something of a trilogy together of fall and then winter and spring. So they sort of follow that pattern of, like an inverse bell curve, right? That because winter winds is very much like a fall from grace. So he was at something of a peak in the cave and then fell in winter winds and then is climbing back up to new life in this song. So I just thought that was really cool that there were, in the language of these 3 songs, there's those connections there. I don't think the next song, which is White Blank Page, has any connection with summer. No. So I think it kind of ends there, but I think these 3 songs together make up something of a pattern with the seasons that way.
Do any of the other songs talk about summer? Maybe.
I don't know. Okay. Dust Bowl Dance, there's definitely some dry heat going on.
That's the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
We'll have to keep an eye on things as we move forward, see if more about the seasons shows up.
We'll see how that develops.
Yeah. So that's the first connection with that line, roll away your stone, is the resurrection of Christ. The second one, and I didn't notice this, but my brother John Paul noticed it when I was talking to him about this song, was in the Divine Comedy, in the Inferno, when Dante and Virgil are in the 4th circle of hell, the circle of the hoarders and the wasters. So they're seeing all the souls of people who are hoarding and or wasting during their life. They're looking at the souls of those people and seeing what their punishment was in hell. And he says this: "Here too I saw a nation of lost souls, far more than were above. They strained their chests against enormous weights, and with mad howls rolled them at one another. Then in haste they rolled them back, one party shouting out, 'Why do you hoard?' and the other, 'Why do you waste?' So back around that ring they puff and blow, each faction to its course, until they reach opposite sides, and screaming as they go, the madmen turn and start their weights again to crash against the maniacs." So you've got these 2 groups of people, the people who were hoarders and the people who were wasters, and they're rolling these giant stones back and forth at each other.
Wow.
So I'm still a little bit mystified about how that might apply to the song here. I suppose it might be an intentional reference, and it does tie in with some other themes that are present in this album, if not in this particular song, because there are several other references to being corrupted by the love of money in later songs on the album. So in Thistle and Weeds, he says, "corrupted by the simple sniff of riches blown." And then Dust Bowl Dance talks about the greed of the landowners that are driving the people off of their land. So who knows? Maybe there's more there than I'm seeing. maybe it's just kind of a stretch.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, I thought that was an interesting connection there. And especially when I bring up this next point.
Mm-hmm.
This next point makes it a little more suspicious to me. Makes me suspect that there might be something there. And it's, what is the other thing that was brought to mind when I heard the words "roll away your stone," right? If you think about a rolling stone,
mm-hmm.
what does it make you think of?
Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan, exactly. Like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan. I mean, it also might make you think of the band The Rolling Stones, but they named themselves after the Bob Dylan songs. So Bob Dylan was prior, both in the order of being and in time.
I didn't know that they named them after that song.
I'm pretty sure. Go look that up. Let me know if it's true. But I think it is. So Bob Dylan's song, Like a Rolling Stone, is all about he's singing it to somebody who used to be on top and have all this money and is now like living on the streets. Mm-hmm. So it's about wealth and greed and waste.
Yeah.
Very much like Dante's Hoarders and Wasters. So I don't know if this is just all like a crazy coincidence that this is all happening, but this Rolling Stone. So I think it's quite possible that Dylan himself is referencing Dante there.
Or, I don't know why Sisyphus, the gods.
Oh, the myth of Sisyphus, yeah.
Sisyphus coming to mind.
That's probably what Dante was referencing.
Yes, but if that's more like a feudal task, or right, that story is talking about like not feudal, but
yeah, feudal.
Feudal.
Yeah, because Sisyphus was condemned to take this giant rock and roll it up a hill.
Yeah.
And then as soon as he reached the top, it would roll back down to the bottom.
Yeah.
And he would have to go push it back up again. Yeah, so who knows with Sisyphus, if that's like actually a connection with Mumford and Sons or not. Right. Or if it's all, maybe these are two separate images about Rolling Stones that we're dealing with.
Yes, because right. So for the Sisyphus, the Sisyphean task, is a feudal task, not going anywhere. Whereas when thinking about Bob Dylan's song, that's more about somebody's world coming crashing down like an avalanche, like a downward spiral kind of thing. Not so much this feudal Sisyphean task, but still using stones, there's that similarity there. Just the weight, the magnitude of a stone. But I think it's different.
It could be.
Yeah.
Could be. We may never know. But I think I'm going to keep trying to figure all that out. So, well, let's move on then finally to the second line of the song. So, first line was roll away your stone, I'll roll away mine. And the second line is together we can see what we will find. So this idea that he's not going through the journey alone, right? He has somebody to help him. So like Dante, who was guided through hell by Virgil, the ancient Roman poet who wrote the Aeneid, this guy also has a companion to go through this with him. And so it's not really clear if it's like a romantic companion who's doing it with him, or if it's somebody else, a mentor of some kind. But somebody's guiding him through it, and he doesn't have to do it alone, which is nice. Because the next line is "Don't leave me alone at this time," and this whole theme of being alone is very much a theme throughout this album. Because we saw in Winter Winds that London was littered with lonely hearts. In Little Lion Man, they're going to talk about his boldness standing alone among the wreck. Tim Shull, the brothers are reassuring the sister that she is not alone in this. Thistle and Weeds, he's complaining about how he was left alone in the wind and the rain. And After the Storm, we have the declaration that I won't die alone and be left there. So definitely a theme of loneliness and togetherness in this album. And so there's definitely this fear of being left alone that's gonna keep coming back throughout the course of the album, which is just a comforting thing to think about, I think, to realize that when you have to go through an intensive journey, like this descent into hell that's happening in this song, you don't have to do it alone. There's at the end of the day, there's somebody there to help you through it, whether it's another person, or your guardian angel, or the Lord, or something along those lines. You're never truly alone. Or are you? That's kind of the question throughout the course of this album, I think, is whether at the end of the day, when going through these things, are we alone or not alone? So I think we'll keep looking for that. And part of what I think is interesting about this song versus the previous one was in Winter Winds, he was trying to run away from loneliness and distracting himself, right, with this other person, with this relationship that he was in, because he was avoiding taking this journey, this descent into his own inner darkness. And so here he is finally making this descent, but it turns out he doesn't have to do it alone. So I think that's kind of an interesting development there. And then the next line, the last line of this stanza is, "For I'm afraid of what I will discover inside." So he knows that when he makes this journey of self-discovery, it's going to be frightening when he gets down there. And in the next stanza, we'll find out why and what exactly those fears are about. But for the moment, I just want to point out how we've already seen the theme of fear being developed in the album. First in the cave with just walking away from all the fears and all the faults that he left behind. But then his fears are resurfacing and growing later on in that song. And then in Winter Winds, he talked about the fear of the cold. And then now we have that he's afraid of making this journey into his interior darkness. And then fears are going to come back in the last song on the album, and After the Storm, when they're talking about how love will not break your heart but dismiss your fears. So, starting the second stanza here, we've got, "'Cause you told me that I would find a hole within the fragile substance of my soul." What's happening here is that this is what he's afraid of, right? He's afraid of finding that hole inside of his soul, which that language is reminiscent of the cave again. The very first line where it says, "It's empty in the valley of your heart." So it's more or less the same as saying that there is a hole in your soul. There's this emptiness inside there, and it needs to be filled with good things. Which leads us into the next line where he says, "And I have filled this void with things unreal." Not only is there a hole in the fragile substance of his soul, but it's being filled with things that aren't real. So with like the false relationships that we were talking about in the Winter Winds episode, and also the in the cave we were talking about the difference between seeing things as they really are versus things in their shadow forms, right? With Plato's cave and with St. Francis walking on his hands and all that. And if you're really confused about what all that has to do with it, just you need to go back and watch that episode if you haven't. But so he's been filling this void, this void in his heart, in his soul, with things that aren't going to satisfy him, that aren't real. And all the while, my character it steals is the next line. And so because he's not filling the hole with things that are really going to satisfy him, the hole continues to sap away, to sap his strength, to steal his very character, his very self, to make him less of who he is, right? It's not like love, which is going to make him be more like the man you were made to be. It's making him less of who he's supposed to be. Needs to stop. And I thought it was interesting, this language of stealing and substance comes back again in a later song in Timshel, where he says, "Death is at your doorstep, and it will steal your innocence, but it will not steal your substance." The words steal and substance are both used in the same stanzas in each of these songs. So this I think there's a deep connection between this song and Timshel regarding the relationship of the soul to the human being, and whether it can be really like taken away from you.
Yeah, and just what is really real. You know, when you're talking about substance, it's like what something is.
Right.
So reality. Just linking it back to that, what is really real.
And I think, doesn't Aristotle use the terms substance and soul interchangeably, more or less?
Yes. I don't know about soul. Soul would be that life, that animating force. Substance is like essence, sort of.
Which I think, historically, etymologically, I think those words are very much tied together, right? Essence and soul and substance. It's all as like the defining principle of the thing.
Right. Yes. So that which gives something life is like what makes it what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think when in Timshel, when it says your substance, I think it essentially means your soul.
Makes you alive. In one sense, yeah.
And so that's the thing that death can't touch, right? But in this song, he's very much afraid that that's what's going to happen. Not so much physical death, but that darkness. Which leads us directly into the next line, the next two lines, where he says, I guess this is the chorus of the song. He says, "Darkness is a harsh term, don't you think? And yet it dominates the things I see." So even though he was already afraid of what he was going to find inside, when, that he was going to find this hole in his soul that was filled with things unreal, once he actually does go down and confront it, he's surprised to see how serious it really is. Like, the problem is even worse than he imagined that it would be. Which is why he says that he considers darkness a harsh term. He's basically saying, this might seem really dramatic to say, but darkness dominates the things that I see. Like, pretty everywhere I look, there's darkness everywhere. And the fact that he is surprised by this reveals just how necessary this journey is for him to make, to go down into his own soul and confront that darkness, and to deal with that. So next verse starts off, "It seems that all my bridges have been burnt," which means more or less I can't go back, right? I've burned those bridges. The only way back is forward. There's language similar to that in the cave at the beginning of that song. But this also makes me think of Dante, of how once you enter hell, you can't turn around and go back and get out. Part of the bizarre geography of the Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso is that Dante has to journey through to the very center of the earth, to the very lowest pit of hell, before he can climb up and out of it, and then begin to climb Mount Purgatory. And that's kind of prefigured when he gets to the entrance to hell, and it says, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here," which in a way it means once you're inside, there's no going back. Past the point of no return, as the Phantom of the Opera would say. So yeah, it seems that he can't go back. And then the next line is, "But you say that's exactly how this grace thing works." So apparently it's a good thing that he can't go back, because this is what has to happen. Like Dante, he needs to go through this in order for grace to kick in and start working. It's interesting to see. So I looked up where the word grace is used on this album in the different songs. And so this is the first time that grace comes up. and he calls it this grace thing, right? Because he's just discovering it and he doesn't really understand it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next time grace is referenced is in Little Lion Man, where he says your grace is wasted in your face. So that's almost like a despair about grace, that like grace is maybe grace is worth something, but in your case you've wasted it away. Mm-hmm. That notion is continued in Dust Bowl Dance, where he's talking to the accuser and talks about your greed and disgrace. So it's kind of a different word, but it's still the same root, right? We've got disgrace happening here. So it's like the opposite of grace, somebody who's fallen from grace. So very similar to grace being wasted. The last time grace is mentioned is in, of course, After the Storm, because literally every single word that's a theme in this album is mentioned in After the Storm. And then that's when it talks about get over your hill and see what you find there, with grace in your heart and flowers in your hair. That really shows what we're aiming for when it comes to grace, what we're trying to get to. Grace as it should be, right? Because this album is all about things being things as they should be.
Right.
And so grace should be in our heart and flowers should be in our hair. And yeah, it's just interesting to see how grace develops throughout the course of the album that way. It seems that all my bridges have been burnt, but you say that's exactly how this grace thing works. And then in the next couple lines, we have the reason why grace works this way. And it's because it's not the long walk home that will change this heart, but the welcome I receive with the restart. So the journey itself isn't what's going to change him, but what is going to change him is the welcome he receives with the restart, right? So that welcome is grace that he's receiving every time he restarts the journey. So it's not so much the journey itself as the fact that he continually chooses to go on the journey.
Yeah, decision.
Right, because remember, this is coming right after Winter Winds, which was a fall from grace. And now he's deciding to take the journey again. And this whole idea of journey that's present, this long walk home, right, is reminiscent of the Odyssey, which was a major theme in the cave, because the Odyssey is all about that long journey back home after the Trojan War. It takes him 10 years and through lots of different trials and lots of trial and error involved there. Okay, a couple different things. The words home and change that are in these lines here, those are mentioned in a couple other songs, and I'm trying to figure out what the connections are there, but they're a little bit fuzzy, because home is mentioned again in I Gave You All, when he says, the blind man sleeps in the doorway his home, which is a line that I'm still trying to figure out. And I'm interested to dive into that more once we get to the episode on I Gave You All. And then, of course, home shows up again in After the Storm, where he says, I guess I'll just go home, or God knows where. So home is a little bit of a theme in this album, but it's not a very clear theme, and I'm not really sure where to go with it. But then when he says, it's not the long walk home that will change this heart, this idea of change is something we've already seen in the cave when he was talking about how I will change my ways. And then it comes up again in Awake My Soul when he says, lend me your eyes, I can change what you see. And seeing and sight is another major theme that shows up in almost every song on the album, which is really not surprising because it's an extremely common image for us to use, even in normal conversation. You're like, I see.
Yeah.
I see what you're talking about. So I think Awake My Soul adds an interesting other dimension to this notion of change, which is central to this song and the cave, because it talks about changing what you see. So not just changing how you behave, but the very way that you see things, which again goes back to Plato's cave in St. Francis, seeing the world hanging upside down. When it comes to really changing ourselves at a fundamental level, we do need to change how we act, but then part of through changing how we act as we develop good habits and practice virtue, that changes the way that we see things. So that's part of the journey of transformation, of change, is changing our perspective about everything.
Right.
But we can talk more about that when we get to Awake My Soul. Okay, and then next the chorus comes back again. He says, darkness is a harsh term, don't you think, and yet it dominates the things I see. So almost everything that he sees is shrouded in darkness, as dramatic as that might sound. And then now we get to this like interlude section, or like bridge, or whatever it is. I guess this is a bridge that hasn't been burnt. And this is where he says, stars, hide your fires, these here are my desires, and I will give them up to you this time around. And so I'll be found with my stake stuck in this ground, marking the territory of this newly impassioned soul. So this is a really interesting passage here. So let's break it down a little bit. So, stars, hide your fires. Another interesting connection with the Divine Comedy is that there are 3 volumes to the Divine Comedy: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. Each one, the very last word in that volume is stars.
Whoa,
yeah.
That's
So
cool.
I was already like trying to find some connections between the song and Dante, and just like discovering a lot of those themes that were common to them. And then I realized that this song also references stars, and stars is a huge leitmotif in the Divine Comedy. So, again, who knows, maybe coincidence, stars are a pretty common image. But it's getting more and more suspicious as time goes on. The other interesting thing is that there is one other song in this album that talks about stars. And that's, again, Tim Shell. Tim Shell talks about the stars and says, choices are what make man great, his ladder to the stars. So if this song is all about change and changing through continually restarting the journey, getting up and moving again, that's a choice. Every time we fail, to get up and to continue the journey. And that's the choice that makes man great, right? That's man's ladder to the stars.
Yes, after illuminating, in the darkened places of one's soul, too, perhaps.
Yeah. Yes, and that's, we'll get into that in just a second with Macbeth. But the last point I want to make about that is this idea of the ladder to the stars. That's exactly what's happening in the Divine Comedy, right? He's journeying through the pits of hell, up Mount Purgatory to... So in Dante's cosmology, geography, heaven is literally up there in the stars. So the whole thing is a journey to the stars. It's Dante's ladder to the stars. It's just, oh man, it's so cool. The really interesting part about these lines is that they are an almost direct quote from Macbeth by Shakespeare. So it's a line spoken by Macbeth, and he says, stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires. So this is he says this towards the beginning of the play, shortly after he's been told by the witches that he's going to become the King of Scotland. It's when he's having an audience with the king, and the king promotes him for the good service that he did in battle, but he hasn't yet become the king. And so he's contemplating in his heart whether or not he's going to kill the king to seize his destiny and become king himself. This is an aside that Macbeth says, and only the audience hears him. So he's saying, stars, hide your fires, let there be complete darkness, because otherwise the light will bring my black and deep desires to the surface and people will see them. And not only will people see them, but I think Macbeth himself is somewhat afraid of these desires that he has in his heart. And so he doesn't want anybody to know about them. He doesn't want to confront them himself. If it hadn't been for his wife, he wouldn't have actually gone through with the plan and killed the king and become king himself. But his wife, who is a complete psychopath, eggs him onto it, and they have a very interesting relationship in the play.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, she's a real interesting piece of work. A fascinating dame, you might say. So what's interesting about this line is that you have this line that's spoken by the play's villain about how he doesn't want anybody to see these black and deep desires that he has in his heart. And yet, what Mumford takes that and like turns it on its head, like he came out of the cave walking on his hands, and he says, "Stars, hide your fires," which is like this defiant dare to the stars. He's like to the darkness, right? He's saying, so what if there's complete darkness? I don't care. These here are my desires, and I will give them up to you this time around. For the longest time, I thought he was saying, I won't give them up to you this time around, which that would make more sense given the line from Macbeth. But he doesn't say that. He says, I will give them up to you this time around. He's saying, even though the darkness is everywhere, I know what my desires are, and I'm going to give them up. And he's giving, I'm not sure entirely who he's talking to, but I think the most likely candidate is God. I will give them up to you. I will give you my desires this time. Yeah. Because I don't need them anymore. And I recognize that I want that deep down, I want something else more. I want something better.
I can't imagine any human being that you would talk to like that.
Right.
With this heavy,
I mean, you could construe it in a romantic sense as well, right?
Yes.
Because you do when you enter into a truly loving romantic relationship with someone, you have to give up your own desires in a way, to an extent at least.
Yeah.
In order to be in that relationship, but this seems to be on a much more cosmic level than just that. So it might be both and. It's probably a both and, to be honest.
Could be, yeah. I guess I'm just not getting a sense of him being in a relationship in this song with another human.
Well, it could be that person that is going on the journey with him, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it can work. I think if we understand that whoever this second person is that he's addressing throughout the song, I think it works on both the level of romantic love and on the level of the relationship with God. A lot of the language implies something of a more cosmic level than just romantic love. Yeah. But on the other hand, romantic love does take things to a cosmic level as well. Yeah. So which is why a relationship between man and woman has been used since time immemorial to represent the relationship between man and God, because of theology of the body.
Yes.
Made in the image and likeness of God and all that. Okay, so before we get carried away,
I just really want it to be about God. That's all.
Yeah, no, I'm almost certain that is part of the meaning here. Okay, and then the next lines are, and so I'll be found with my stake stuck in this ground, marking the territory of this newly impassioned soul. That language of the stake in the ground, marking the territory. He has reached the end of his journey, and he's decided that this is where he wants to stay. It's the end of a journey and the beginning of a new story that happens after that. New life
been breathed into him.
His soul is filled with passion now. It's newly impassioned. It's no longer is he saying this time no, like it was in Winter Winds, right? His soul is on fire. It is filled with passion. The idea of apathy, which will come up in I Gave You All, and which was sort of hinted at in Winter Winds and earlier on in the song, that's no longer an issue because his soul has been impassioned. Basically, he's reached the paradiso level of the journey, at least on this on the microcosmic scale of this particular song. Not so much in terms of where the album overall is going, but
this tiny story within the larger story.
Yeah, exactly. He's reached paradise. This last, like an epilogue or an afterthought at the end of the song. It says, "But you've gone too far this time. You have neither reason nor rhyme with which to take this soul that is so rightfully mine." It's kind of mysterious. It's very haunting, the way that it's sung. It's, the music kind of just like cuts off abruptly. And he sort of chants this little rhyme at the end there. Also, I love how the word rhyme is itself a rhyme in this line here. You've gone too far this time. You have neither reason nor rhyme. I just like how the word rhyme rhymes with something. I think that's really cool. This line, or this passage, confused me for a long time. I'm still not entirely sure that I've got it figured out. But because I always thought that he was addressing the same person that he had been addressing throughout the rest of the song. Which works if he's addressing a human being. It doesn't so much make sense if he's speaking to God, although it could. I guess you could construe it in a way that would make sense there. I think what makes the most sense is if we interpret it as him talking to that hole within his soul that he talked about earlier in the song, because he's already talked about how that hole was trying to steal his character, right? Steal away his personhood. So he says, you have neither reason nor, you have no right to take away this soul that is mine. And so I think what's happening is, with the new strength and the new passion that he's found by putting his stake in the ground and marking his territory, he now has the strength to go confront that darkness and say, you have no right to take my soul. My soul is mine.
Like he has more power. He has power over these things that are making him less like himself, whatever that might be.
Right.
Just claiming that authority over them, perhaps.
But it is also curious that he's so insistent that his soul belongs to him. Because he talked about how he was going to give up his desires to somebody else a few lines ago. And whether that's God or the woman that he loves, now he's saying that his soul is very much rightfully his. So I don't know if this language is meant to be in juxtaposition to that language of surrendering his desires, but I think it makes the most sense if we interpret it as him saying that his soul rightfully belongs to him, as opposed to that void that was trying to steal away his character, steal away his personhood. So I think that's what makes the most sense. It's the exact same idea that is mentioned in Awake My Soul, where he says, but your soul you must keep totally free. Lend me your eyes, I can change what you see, but your soul you must keep totally free. So this idea that the soul can never really be given away, almost. I don't know, I'm trying to figure out if he is trying to say that, like, nobody, not even God, ultimately can take his soul from him.
Yeah.
That he can never really give it away.
It's possible, definitely.
Which I think would be something of a misunderstanding of Christianity, right?
Yeah. I guess, or you could just maybe look at it as like full autonomy, over his life, which is not necessarily inconsistent with Christianity in the sense that God's given us free will, perhaps. Just taking that ownership, like I can make my own decision, sort of thing. Kind of going back to this restart that he's choosing to do. Right.
Which is all about how we're claiming autonomy for ourselves as opposed to fears and faults and vices that are trying to control us. Right? Yeah, I think that's what makes the most logical sense. Not that he's like trying to withhold his soul from God because, or from his beloved, because that language about giving up his desires to the other, that would seem to contradict this line.
I think he's still figuring it out too.
Right.
So, and I think
maybe he's oscillating back and forth. Maybe he's not got it all figured out yet. I mean, I would definitely agree that that's the case. So, like, yeah, the microcosmic journey has been completed, but man has by no means reached his ultimate destination. Right. At the end of this song, it's almost like you know, a little teaser at the end of the TV show to like introduce the villain for the next episode or something like that, right? To be like, hey, you know, you thought everything was wrapped up, but remember, there's still
rising action.
Yeah, there's still something that needs to be resolved here. The story's not over. Hang in there. No. Next week we'll pick it up again, and things will get darker for a while, because we've got White Blank Page. I gave you all Little Lineman next.
Little Lineman's next.
Okay, yeah. So there's a lot of dark songs on this album. It deals with a lot of really heavy stuff.
Slow dance.
Thistle and Weeds.
Thistle and Weeds. Yeah, so then it gets a little happier towards the end.
Yeah, a little bit.
We're going through, I guess maybe we're going through hell. Maybe purgatory. I'm not sure. Maybe.
I don't think the album is evenly split the way that Dante's Divine Comedy is. Yeah. There's definitely more darkness than light, I think, in this album. But in every song there is a blend of darkness and light. The whole album is this marvelous chiaroscuro of darkness and light. And so glory be to God for dappled things. Yeah. Well, we've reached the end of the song now, which means it's time for everybody's favorite part. It's time to talk about what we've learned today. So, in my notes here, I just wrote, this song is about, and I forgot to finish the thought, so I'm just gonna have to wing it from there. But I think it's pretty evident by this point that within the narrative of the album, so in Sigh No More, we had like the foundation laid for us of what we're ultimately trying to reach, which is man as he was made to be, love as it was made to be, etc. And then in The Cave, we saw him start to set out on that journey of discovering of changing his ways to become who he was made to be, and the suffering that accompanies that. And then in Winter Winds, we saw his fall from grace into a bad relationship. And now in this song, he's stopped running away. He's overcome his resistance to dealing with the problems that he has inside of his heart. And he finally confronts them, discovers grace, and as grace works inside of him to change his heart by setting out on that journey continually. Yeah. Call of grace and light. I feel like light too. The stars. Yeah, just that journey, that cycle of life, death, resurrection, you know, that every one of us goes through in this life. In a sense, we go through that. That's the smaller story within the bigger story of our eternal, you know, end, our eternal destination, wherever that may be. We hope it's heaven. That's what we want. What we want to be. Yep. This is a song about new life. Springtime, and descending down into that darkness and then rising up out of it, and having the strength to then face it and reject it and claim your soul as your own instead of letting it be sucked away by the darkness inside of your heart. I love this song. This is one of my favorites on the album, I think. It's great. I feel like I could say that about most of the songs, but this one, I just love the little musical ditty at the very beginning of the song. It's almost like, to me, it really evokes that notion of like springtime and like a springtime festival. Yes. Like
that twangy banjo.
Right.
Mhm.
It's love is in the air kind
Mhm.
of sound to it. Just it makes me want to get up and dance.
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yes, it is a good one.
It's a great song.
It sure is. Well, this has been great. I've learned a lot about Macbeth and about Dante. It's on my list of books to read.
You should read it one day.
I know. I want to. And now I really want to, so I can see the word star as the last word of each book.
I don't know if every
section.
Translation renders it that way, but
better.
But if you read the Chiardi translation, which is the one I read in college and really enjoyed, then you'll see that. Maybe we'll do a Dante read through.
Yeah.
At some point,
That'd
you
be
and I
cool.
can like read along the same schedule or something like that.
Cool.
But you all don't need to listen to us make plans for that. So we are going to sign off for now after reminding you that this podcast is a production of The Flight House. Go check us out on buymeacoffee.com/theflighthouse. You can see all the different projects that we're working on there. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe on YouTube, and or give us a positive 5-star rating and a positive review on Apple Podcasts, because that'll really help us out. So until next time, we are T.S. Russell and Bridget Gamboni, reminding you to sigh no more.